Welcome to L-Forms 203, Form 6, Events, Reporting, and Analytics. My name is Wesley Chen. I'm a pre-sales consultant with Laserfiche. My primary responsibilities are to help with software configuration issues and answer questions of a technical nature. Along with me is Yan. He's going to help me with any kind of directional tech form type questions because he is part of the software development team. Also, I want to make a brief mention. L-Forms 103, Forms 3 Building Forms Lab just occurred previously, and that's one of my recommendations. The slides will be published later on after Empower, as well as L-Forms, the class before here, Forms 5, covers content that's the other half of this course, and that slide will also be available if you need to take a look at any of that information. So, audience, you're in here because you're interested in being able to diagram business processes. You're interested in being able to take various processes that you see in your company, such as an HR new hire approval, and be able to take that and diagram that for your business process. Sorry, I'm super tired today. Business process creation. And then you're also interested in being able to take this diagram and gain the business value from it by automating simple and mundane tasks, such as email notifications. Just hand that over to the computer, right? And this is a brief roadmap of where we'll be heading today. So we're going to take a look at how sub-processes can help us build better and more complex business diagrams and forms. We're also going to move over to two new events that were really brought on based on really popular feature requests, such as the Signal event and the Terminate End event. And then finally, we're going to end by looking at new reporting features in Laserfiche Forms, the operational dashboard. Before we begin, I just want to take a look at this. This is a form that's built in Laserfiche Forms. And the question is, what are we really working with when we're building forms business diagrams? Well, we're working with this content that's submitted in this fillable formed fields, and we're able to provide structure to the content that's normally unstructured. We're able to provide structure to certain things such as dates. If we want 2 digits dash 4 digits, we can do that and force users who are interacting the form and to structure the content before it gets to our repository so it's good content. And we can take this form and kick off a business process. Now, we covered how we standardize a notation, but really what I want to get across here is look how easy it is to understand. In this approval process, we have a few different, we have an activity, we have a gateway, we have a few different elements on this business process canvas, but just at a glance, you can understand what's going on. That's really the point. And so I mentioned sub-processes and how it can help us build better complex diagrams. That's where you have a large organization and maybe you're dealing with many different business processes at a single time, building each one in forms, and some of them are really large and expansive. Sub-processes can help you here. So I want to bring up an example, and some of you who stayed for my last course might be familiar with this example, but a lot of times what happens is there's a stakeholder, some executive, some person who's interested in automating a process. They go to the IT person, they ask them, hey, can you help me diagram this? Can you help me automate this? So that business person, that technical person is going to come in and start building their diagram. And when they're done, they're going to have to go back to the stakeholder and show them what they've built. But sometimes it's really expansive and it's complex. And so it's not going to communicate really well. And that's one area where sub-processes can help. They can help us create, turn a complex multifunctional diagram into a more consolidated diagram where the stakeholder can easily and readily understand. Additionally, it can prevent some rework, existing work, and we'll get into that a little further on. And the example we'll be taking a look at is a vacation resort company. They currently have 3 facilities, and they're expanding to a 4th facility. They have 400 employees, and so they have this new hire process set in place with reviewers that review the information. And they're interested in being able to automate this process. One aspect of it is that they have multiple reviewers interacting with these applications at once, and that's one of the criteria. So what does this process look like? So this is the process in Forms. Notable aspects of it is that there is a 3-day soft reminder to the reviewer in case they get off task. And so you can think of this process in 2 parts. The first part is where the application comes in and it gets to the reviewer and they review it, and if 3 days goes by, they will get a soft notification to get back on task. They get back on task, they continue. The second part is triaging the approval. So if it's approved, it goes through. If it's rejected, then an email gets sent out to the applicant. So as the application comes in, the timer event kicks off, 3 days. The reviewer gets notified again, they get back on task, and we continue along. And this is fine for a one-step reviewer process, but I mentioned that they have multiple reviewers interacting with this form, this diagram. And so how does that look? Well, as we're adding more and more of these links, it can start to get a little unwieldy. This is a little complicated, but fundamentally, we are dealing with the same form. It's just repeated. So how can we deal with this in a nicer way? Simply put, we can subsume this business process diagram into a sub-process activity. In doing so, we take a very complex-looking form and we turn it into something that looks like this. But if we ever go back down into each sub-process activity, we can see that our links exist, and it does exactly what we expect it to. And so, just to recap, we're able to have this 2-perspective view where we can show the technical person exactly what they need if they like to play around the activities, play around the events, and they really like that complex, multifunction looking diagram. But we're also able to show a more consolidated view for any stakeholder that just wants to know, hey, did you build my 2-person review process? Don't show me anything really crazy, right? And additionally, we have more opportunities for notation. So even though each activity, each event is named something, we can name the entire segment something else, and then we can copy that segment. So before I move on, does anyone have any questions? Yes?
Is this process part of the main process, or it can be used in different processes?
These processes belong to the main process, so they are not reusable across different processes.
Yeah. So now we have a way of handling really complex diagrams, right? But we also can then start introducing more functionality in our forms and introducing new events. And these events really come from our community, Laserfiche users, because we like to hear from you and hear what you want in our forms processes with our user studies. And throughout the year, we're always listening to Laserfiche Answers, looking at what you're asking for in forms. And so these new events really come from you. The first one is feature requests for a way to have information come from workflow. And that's not really the main topic at hand. It's the Terminate End Event, which is this new event that we've introduced. And it's a way to handle any response to lingering processes, really terminate something that is an error or shouldn't have occurred in the system. And it's a response to the workflow service task introduction, which is a way of bringing information out of workflow and into forms so it can be used in forms. And our example today for showing how Terminate End Events work is a manufacturing plant. Now, this manufacturing plant has 3 different systems. They have an ERP system, which gathers all information of how their manufacturing floor operates. They have a workflow that then brings that information into Laserfiche. And then they have the forms, which is primarily what people are interested in seeing, what people are interested in using, because it's really simple and it's easy to understand. And so there's a floor manager who likes to request this information, but he only wants to see forms. So how can we make this possible, and what can we do with these new events? Well, the process might look something like this. As a request from the ERP system, as a request from the manager comes in for the ERP system, two activities get engaged. The manager to review the information that's brought back from the ERP system, as well as the retrieve ERP activity. And as the ERP activity is engaging workflow and bringing the information back, we need a way to account for the fact that that information might come back and it might be terribly incorrect. Not that we just don't want to see it because it's bad information, but it might be in error in some way that we've put conditions in to identify that. And so what's going to happen is the terminate end event engages and kills the process before that manager is able to act on this bad information. And in doing so, we build a way so that when any technical person goes back to view the processes in the forms, they can identify what has terminated and go straight to those processes and troubleshoot any error that's occurred. Before I move on, does anyone have any questions about this? Yes?
Why wouldn't you really just do those sequentially, like retrieve the ERP information and then just do the review after that? Terminate before you actually go to the review. Why would you try to do it in parallel?
Why would I build it out like this?
Yeah, instead of just in a single sequential line.
You could build it in a sequential line. So you request the information, and then the manager gets a chance to interact with that information. In that sequential view, that might engage the manager to act on that information depending on how you build it out, which might pose a problem, as I mentioned earlier. In this case, the manager still gets that information from the ERP system, but you also have a chance to terminate the process if you sometimes get some sort of failed reading.
So the terminate process or terminate end event available on perform per task basis?
I'm sorry?
So in that diagram there, the retrieve ERP shows that there's an option for that person task terminate the flow, right?
Right.
Can that same option be added to the manager review service task?
Yes, you can append that event to the manager review.
Both of them can have terminate end event functionality.
You could do that. The way the terminate end event works, essentially, it's really intended for responding to an error in the system and responding in that way. And so it would trigger without any actual participant intervention, because it's not supposed to have a participant activate the stop. Like, that's not the real intention. Yeah. Any other questions? Moving on, let's review first. So terminate end events allow us to handle some special occurrences, special exceptions in our system, retrieving information, as well as the workflow service task, which is a brief mention of our new way of ability to bring information from workflow and have workflow do a lot more for forms. We also have signal events, which was also in response to a feature request, of a way to have a responsive type event. And this is to be able to build a catch and throw. Another way to think about it is having some sort of broadcast and some kind of receiving event. And our example is a college institution. This college institution normally has this purchase order that they review, and they've come across some hard times. And so they need to have a special exception for any purchases over 50,000. And so they have to build in this into their forms process. Let's take a look at what this looks like. And if it's over 50,000, the CFO comes into play. And so this might be what our process looks like. And you might notice some new events if you're familiar with forms. There is a yellow intermediate signal event that has a filled-in triangle and one that does not have a filled-in triangle. And this is the signal event. So I'll show you how that works. As that purchase order request comes in, it's going to engage both the manager for approval as well as the CFO because the dollar amount's over $50,000. And the CFO might get to it first because he has a lower workload, and he goes, oh, wait, this really shouldn't be approved. So he's going to veto that approval. The moment that veto goes through, it's going to engage that signal event, and it's going to throw a signal to any signal events listening for that signal. And when that catch signal hears that specific signal, it's going to immediately interrupt the manager's ability to approve the purchase order and move it to a different branch. And so with this way, we're allowed to build in some more cases, some more business cases in our processes. We're able to interrupt certain activities where we normally wouldn't easily be able to do. Or we're able to synchronize multiple branches using the signals that listen to each other. Before I move on, does anyone have any questions about the signal event?
Can they correlate it more than like one-to-one or one-to-many?
Yeah.
In either direction? So
Signal events, as you recall, one's filled in and one's not. So one is the broadcaster, one's the receiver, and when you configure the signal events, you configure it almost like this is signal A, that's signal B, signal C. It's, yeah.
So actually, these signal events, they are defined by signal names. As long as the signal name are the same, the listener will receive the broadcast.
Right.
So you can have a one-to-many relation or many-to-one relation. That's all work.
Any other questions? And so finally, with all these new different functionalities, we need a way to be able to understand what's going on inside our process. And so we've brought in Operational Dashboard, which is an ability to be able to view at a glance the information that's going on in your process and easily understand it if you're having multiple processes at a time. So I mentioned it incorporates a visual element as well as it reports on your process stages. And so you're able to identify various areas where you're lacking resources, identify bottlenecks, and be able to deal with them as you're running these processes so that you can run your business more efficiently. So we're going to take a look at this in this example of a 3-stage process. And for those of you who are new to staging in forms, it's essentially the ability to segment your one business process into multiple different phases. And we have 3 different phases here: the initial review, the screening, and the interview. And this is just to drive it home, 3 phases. And this is what it might look like in forms. Pretty simple, just to really illustrate the operation dashboard so you see what we're talking about. Those same 3 different stages that exist. And so when we simply put those denotions there, in our operational dashboard, we're given a lot of different information at a glance, and it's visual and it pops out. Zooming in, we can see that there's 21 instances currently occurring with this process. 1 is suspended, so we can see that. We can also have a breakdown of these processes by stage, by the different stages, and so we know that maybe one. We can see that for screening, it's actually clustering a lot of them. And normally the laptop's here, so I can read you the number, but you can see there's a lot of them stuck in the middle. And so that might be a bottleneck. Something is wrong with screening. Furthermore, with this due date, we can see that just a lot of them are getting to the overdue. So we need to address this. Looking at the bottom of the operational dashboard, we have a clear breakdown that a lot of the overdue are falling into the screening category. And so we have to revisit how we're allocating our resources, how many participants we're putting into our screening process. Maybe we have to broaden the amount of people in our teams. So this is really helpful information that we're able to see. Does anyone have any questions about the operational dashboard? Yeah, it's pretty simple stuff, right? And so the operational dashboard is a quick and intuitive glance into what's going on inside your process. You're able to have this information and see it and have this visual element included. Just want to recap and get you guys out of here a little early. We have sub-processes, which you're allowed to reuse work, reuse business process segments, as well as provide this two-dimensional view of a business process to different stakeholders in that company, as well as two new events that are very useful for their specific cases, the signal event and the terminate end event. One is a receiver that allows for responsive events. The terminate end event allows you to stop certain errors from occurring in your process. And finally, the operational dashboard, which allows you to provide a comprehensive report for what's going on in your process. And I would recommend you go to these courses, but I'm pretty sure they're not being offered anymore. So we will be publishing the slides online for you to review. And as always, we have our online resources, our knowledge base. There's a lot of tech papers, white papers, things that even I find helpful reading through. Laserfiche Answers, you can always pose a question and have people provide an answer with a really quick turnaround. We have our devs, we have our pre-sales monitoring those forums. We have our CPP, our e-learning online module where you can go and take a course on just any different element of Laserfiche you want to take. And if you have any feedback for us to where we can develop forums, I highly recommend you visit us at the Info Center. We have our user studies where we're always listening to you. And across the whole year, we're listening to you in our Laserfiche Answers. Thank you so much.